Hello everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video, Shadowlands is a mere month away, and it is time to begin ranking the classes. We're going to be ranking the healers in today's video, and in order to rank them, I'm not only going to consider their power, which can obviously change with tuning, but more importantly, I'm going to consider how much fun the spec is to play in different types of content. So probably about 30% of the consideration is based off the power and 70% is off the fun. Something along those lines, though obviously being powerful is fun in itself, so there's a little overlap there. And it is worth noting before we dive in as well that of course you can play any class if you really like that class. I will say especially so with healers. Healers are always in pretty high demand, and unlike some of the DPS specs, which I think are genuinely pretty bad, I actually think that all of these healer specs are pretty solid in their own right, though I will of course rank them from what I think is worst to best. I would say overall, I'd rank like the bottom 4 healers as roughly similar to each other, but then there are 2 healers I think that sort of stand higher, stand a little bit apart from the pack, a little bit ahead. Without any further ado though, let's dive in to the video. In last place then, because of course there always does have to be one spec in last place, and that is going to be the Mistweaver Monk. Now it's not a bad spec by any means. Like I said in the intro, I actually think all of the healer specs are quite good, are quite solid. The Mistweaver has certain particular strengths. It's a very straightforward spec. It's very easy to make it work, very easy to pick it up. It has phenomenal sustained single target healing. If one person in your group starts taking huge damage, the Mistweaver, more than any other spec in the game, can snap onto that target and start just channeling huge sustained single target healing into them. That's better than everyone else can do. And I actually think that that strength, much like in BFA, is going to be really strong in the first tier, right? At the start of the expansion, when everyone has terrible gear, that's a really useful thing to bring. Although it does start to fall off, this strength gets worse and worse and worse and worse as the expansion goes on, in particular as the tanks get more gear and become more self-sufficient and they're not relying on their healers as much to keep them alive. That strength for the Mistweaver starts to fade away a bit, so do consider that. The Mistweaver also has a couple of new tricks up its sleeve for Shadowlands. The big thing here is Invoke Yu'lon, the Jade Serpent. It's a new raid healing cooldown for Mistweaver. It's a 3-minute cooldown. You summon an effigy of Yu'lon who's going to hang around for 25 seconds and just heal your team for you. In the talent tree, this can be upgraded into Invoke Chi-Chi the Red Crane, where you summon an effigy of Chi-Chi that will kick up a Gust of Mist, so your mastery healing, whenever you Blackout Kick, Rising Sun Kick, or Spinning Crane Kick. So in other words, whenever you're doing your physical attacks that are part of your damage rotation, he is going to heal your team for you. On top of that, every third attack that you do is going to stack up this buff that will let you instant cast a free Enveloping Mist, which is your biggest single target heal. So that's really, really nice. And while it's fantastic to have a new healing cooldown as a Mistweaver, because that was really something that you felt was missing in BFA, they're not quite as good as some of the best healing cooldowns in the game. Wings for Holy Paladin, Spirit Link Totem for the Resto Shaman, those healing cooldowns are just more impactful and more fun to play around than Invoke Yu'lon is. And in particular, I'm actually very disappointed with Invoke Chi-Chi the Red Crane, because you're going to be losing Way of the Crane, which is a PvP talent that you're using as part of your core rotation, your core toolkit as a Mistweaver for lots of BFA, thanks to an essence that actually lets you use this even in PvE. You can see the comparison of the tooltips right here, and I mean, there's a couple of things that really disappoint me about Chi-Chi. Number one, it's a 3-minute cooldown compared to Way of the Crane being a 1-minute cooldown. You got 3 Way of the Cranes out for every Chi-Chi that you get, so that definitely kind of sucks. And I also do have to say, I really miss the damage boost of Way of the Crane. That just felt a little bit better. It felt more impactful, more directly tied in, and it really felt like I was blasting damage. You don't have that as much, and it's definitely a weakness of the Mistweaver, that their damage is just pretty poor compared to a lot of the other healers at the moment. My biggest issue with the Mistweaver Monk though is that I just find it a little bit boring, to be honest with you. I just feel like there's not quite enough in its toolkit that really interacts, particularly when you're healing in the raid. I feel like the spec, you know, half of the time it mostly plays itself. There's not too much going on there, and that is why I have to rank it near the bottom. I think it's a great healer for beginners. I think you're going to have great success with this spec. I think it's going to be powerful in nearly all sorts of content, but I do have the concern, I do have the worry that you might just get a little bit bored. My favorite Covenant ability at the moment for Mistweaver is actually Feline Stomp for the Night Fae, which just got a bit of a rework yesterday. You're going to strike the ground fiercely, exposing a Feline for 30 seconds. It's going to do a bit of damage to up to 5 enemies, and it's also going to do a little bit of healing to up to 5 allies within 30 yards of that Feline Stomp. On top of that, Up to 5 allies that are standing in the Fey line, if you hit them with the Fey line, they're going to get healed by an Essence Font Bolt, which is pretty fun. And now, not only does this look absolutely visually incredible on the ground, but your abilities that you cast while you are standing in the Fey line are going to have a 6% chance to reset the cooldown on that Fey line. So you can get loads of these out. You can kind of grow your Night Fae tree on the ground. It looks incredible, and it gives you quite a lot of extra AoE damage and extra AoE healing, which I think actually works quite nice. It's quite a lot of fun to play with. Next up, we have the Holy Paladin, which is by far the most changed healing spec coming into Shadowlands. Holy Power has returned to the Holy Paladin. You're going to generate 1 Holy Power whenever you do a Crusader Strike, a Holy Shock, or whenever you heal your Beacon of Light target with Holy Light or with Flash of Light. Spend 3 Holy Power for your old reliable Light of Dawn AoE heal, or for Word of Glory, which is a massive single target heal. Basically, Blizzard said, okay, you liked Holy Shock in BFA, we'll have Word of Glory. It's a super Holy Shock. It's even better. In my opinion, this change actually really improves the Holy Paladin playstyle. It was a lot of fun in BFA to spam out Holy Shocks constantly and have that be nearly all of your healing. But I actually think that managing your Holy Power, thinking about how you're going to generate it, thinking about how you're going to spend it, is a much more rewarding playstyle. This does mean that Holy Paladin now has a big weakness, which is healing their group. They're not great at group healing. I think a good metaphor to explain it is like if you compare it to something like a Holy Priest, for example, whereas the Holy Priest is kind of like a firefighter who runs into a burning building and collects all the family that's stuck inside in one go and just slowly carries them out and saves them all at the same time. The Holy Paladin is much more like a firefighter who runs in and very quickly saves them one at a time. This sort of healing works really well if you're with a safe class like a Frost Mage who has about 1 billion defensive cooldowns. But it can get a little bit scary, it can get a little bit sketchy if you're playing with specs that are quite vulnerable, like the Enhancement Shaman, for example. Some good news then is that the other big strength of the Holy Paladin is they have some incredibly powerful healing cooldowns. Avenging Wrath Your Wings is just as powerful as it was before, and the reworked Holy Avenger in the talent tree, which triples your Holy Power generation, essentially giving you a Light of Dawn or Word of Glory with every single Holy Power generator, is going to make a massive difference in keeping your group safe. But you do have to plan how you're going to use these cooldowns and plan about how you're going to deal with healing your team when you don't have those cooldowns available. One big change that I also haven't seen talked about much is that Aura Mastery with Devotion Aura has actually been nerfed down quite a bit in Shadowlands. Whereas this provided 20% damage reduction for your whole raid in BFA, Devotion Aura, now baseline with a new Aura system in Shadowlands, is giving you 3% damage reduction, and Aura Mastery increases that damage reduction to 15%. In other words, Aura Mastery is now a 12% additional damage reduction for your team. That's 8% lower than the 20% that you had before, so that's a big change. I think with the new auras, it's definitely a great reason to bring Holy Paladin to your group, but there is a bit more competition now, I think, from the other Paladin specs that can bring those auras as well. Overall, I think you'll really enjoy Holy Paladin though, if you want a bit of a challenge, right? I think it's fairly difficult to play a melee healer. It's more difficult than playing a ranged healer. But in return, you're going to do some really good damage. And if you like the idea of having extremely potent spot healing, great group utility, and very, very powerful healing cooldowns that you have to play around, then I think Holy Paladin is going to be great for you. My favorite Covenant ability for the Holy Paladin is Divine Toll. It's a 1-minute cooldown that instantly casts Holy Shock on up to 5 targets within 30 meters of you. Not only does this do a big burst of healing by itself, but by generating 5 Holy Power, that also enables you to top up your group. So this, I feel, really fills a hole in the Holy Paladin toolkit and is super satisfying to play with. In 4th place then, I have the Restoration Shaman. I think the Resto Shaman is really a tale of 2 different types of content. In raids, Resto Shaman is absolutely incredible. It's a top tier healer. They're super strong at healing their group when they're stacked up, just pumping chain heals through their group, getting healing rains down on them, downpours, wellsprings, all of these AoE heals just flowing over the group, on top of bringing absolutely tons of cool utility. You've got a totem for everything as a Resto Shaman, Capacitor Totem for stuns, Tremor Totem to break out of fears, Spirit Link Totem to save your raid, Ancestral Protection Totem to give someone who dies a free battle res. This spec is a whole lot of fun to play, and in raids I can heartily recommend them. The problem for me with Resto Shaman is when it comes to Mythic Plus. One of the big new things that you've got in the Shadowlands is Earth Shield. This is now baseline, and this really helps with what was in BFA a real tough time with healing the tank as a Resto Shaman. But the big thing that stands out to me is that probably the biggest strength of Resto Shaman, their ability to heal a group that is stacked up While that's a great strength in Raid, it is their biggest weakness in Mythic Plus, especially at the start of a new expansion. Now, there are 8 new dungeons here with a whole bunch of new bosses, a whole bunch of new mobs. People are going to be figuring out which routes to go through the dungeons. They're going to be figuring out how to even play their classes. I don't really think that in the middle of all of that many players are going to stop and say, oh, hey, you know what? While we're doing this whole new fight, I wonder, are we stacked close enough together so that our Resto Shaman can do chain heals efficiently? Oh, golly, I better reposition myself. That's just not something that's going to happen all that much, and it can be a real stress as the Resto Shaman to try to figure out, oh no, our group is taking big damage. I'm trying to figure out where that damage is coming from in these new dungeons. Are my team close enough together to do chain heals, or is this going to just hit one person and start to really screw us over? I think this will become better, obviously, later in the expansion when people are comfortable with the dungeons. But I think this is a type of stress that you don't really need in your life on expansion launch. So that is a big negative for me for the Resto Shaman. That being said, if raiding is your main thing, this spec is absolutely incredible. And if you're able to play with, a group of friends that can play around your strengths as the Resto Shaman and can make use of all that incredible utility that you bring, I think you'll find great success in dungeons as well. My favorite Covenant ability so far for Resto Shaman has actually bounced around a bit, but right now it's Chain Harvest with the Venthyr. This is a big old cast time, 2.5 second cast, and a 1.5 minute cooldown. But this is essentially a super duper Chain Lightning and Chain Heal put together as one. It will hit up to 5 enemies and heal 5 allies, all in the one cast. It also has its cooldown reduced whenever you get a crit, and hey, you're already stacking crit as Resto Shaman because it gives you some mana return on your spells. That's already a great stat, so that works really well. But this is just super satisfying in a dungeon, especially when you're fighting a tough mob pack. They're doing lots of damage to your group. You just throw out this Chain Harvest and chunk that mob pack and chunk up the health bars of your team as well. In third place then, just by a small margin, I'm putting the Holy Priest. And I know, people are going to go crazy about this, but Holy Priest, it really is the most dismissed healing spec in the entire game. People look at it, go, hey, it's not Disc Priest, and then they just assume it's rubbish and they throw it right at the bottom of their tier list. But when you actually sit down and look at the spec in Shadowlands, I think you're going to find the most improved healing spec in the entire game. In BFA, dealing damage as a Holy Priest was honestly pretty miserable, and that has been radically improved here in Shadowlands. Holy Fire has been reworked. Now it's a 10-second cooldown with a short, snappy cast time that does a really good chunk of damage. Shadow Word Pain is also available for the Holy Priest, giving you a Shadow School of Magic that helps you multi-dot and do some good efficient damage. And Shadow Word Death is in there as well for some execute damage too. On top of that, Circle of Healing, a short cooldown, instant cast, very efficient group heal, is now baseline for the Holy Priest, and Prayer of Mending, which again does a similar thing, is now instant cast as well. And these two things really tie into the strength of the Holy Priest, which is very, very consistent group healing. They always have some group healing going on. There's never a time where they're really lacking in that. I think you add that on to what is already a very fun core healer gameplay style, playing around your Holy Words, where you have these really big, powerful instant cast Holy Words that do big single target healing or big group healing, and their cooldowns get reduced whenever you do your smaller spammable AoE or single target heals, and you have a super fun healing spec that's really, really underrated. On top of that, of course, one of the massive bits of utility that all the pre-specs are getting in Shadowlands is Power Infusion, a 2-minute cooldown that lets you infuse anyone, yourself or a party member, with 25% haste for 20 seconds. Now, haste isn't necessarily that useful for Holy Priest, so you may need this on yourself sometimes if you're in a really difficult healing encounter, but you're going to be best friends with some of your damage dealers this expansion because you're going to be able to give them Power Infusion, and they will be very, very happy to have you in the group. Another small but actually very impactful change to your core gameplay's Holy Priest is the buff to Apotheosis. This is a talent, 2-minute cooldown, that is essentially supposed to help you healing in dungeons. This now resets the cooldowns on your Holy Words when you activate it. And again, this just really helps you in that dungeon scenario, makes it much more reliable, and is a big, big win. The Holy Priest, of course, like all the specs, has a couple of weaknesses though. Its burst healing isn't the best, that's okay, but the biggest weakness by far is that they have absolutely terrible defensives. If you look at a Frost Mage, for example, who have so many defensives, they have more defensive buttons than Havoc Demon Hunters have buttons in their core rotation. And then you look at the poor old Holy Priest who sat there with only Desperate Prayer. you realize that this is a very desperate situation indeed, and this could very much scare people away from using Holy Priests in higher level content, because quite simply, they're just always at a very high risk of dying. But if you like playing a healer that is versatile, that's really good at healing in basically every single situation, and has a really fun just core healing toolset that makes sense, right? It's the core fantasy of what a healer is supposed to be. They're also fun doing damage right now. I think the Holy Priest is looking really, really nice for Shadowlands. My favorite Covenant ability for the Holy Priest is the Boon of the Ascended. This is a whopping 3-minute cooldown. This transforms you into an Ascended form for 10 seconds. This replaces Smite with Ascended Blast, which is a big single target hit with a short cooldown, and it also gives you a spammable AoE damage and AoE heal in Ascended Nova. The fun thing about this is that Ascended Blast will also heal for the damage you do, so this is not only a very, very potent DPS cooldown, especially in AoE, but it's also a really powerful group heal as well. The more Ascended spells you cast during your Boon of the Ascended will stack up this Ascended buff, and after the Boon of the Ascended expires 10 seconds later, you'll explode in an Ascended Eruption, doing a big chunk of AoE damage to all enemies within range, and a big chunk of AoE healing to all allies in range, and again, that healing is going to stack up based off of each stack that you built up. Moving up to our final 2 healer picks then, again, to reiterate what I said in the intro, these are the ones that stand out for me above the others. I think you consider the previous 4 healer specs I've discussed in this video as relatively interchangeable. I think you could switch those around and be just fine, but I think these 2 healer picks do stand out as being just a little bit more fun or a little bit more powerful. In second place, we have the Resto Druid, and the Resto Druid is almost definitely going to retain its crown as the best healer in Mythic Plus content. In terms of their gameplay, the Resto Druid is all about heal over time effects and spreading those around their party, and they have a very, very fun mastery that ties in with this called Mastery Harmony, where your healing is going to be increased for every heal over time effect you have on a target. This means that Resto Druid isn't really tied down to healing cooldowns to make them powerful. They can be powerful at healing whenever they plan ahead and do it properly. They can stack heal over time effects on their group, they can stack it on their tank on a single target, and be really good at any sort of healing that's required of them. There really aren't that many changes to Resto Druid from BFA, but one of the big things that will stand out for healing is the rework to Swiftmend. Swiftmend now has a shorter cooldown, costs less mana, and heals for more, but it will consume one of your heal over time effects on the target. On the whole though, this is a very big win, right? This is a very, very powerful reactive heal on a short cooldown, and the cost there, it's really not that bad. You can just reapply that heal over time. It's not a big loss. The other big strength of Resto Druid, of course, is their incredible utility in Mythic Plus. They've got knockbacks, they've got Ursol's Vortex to stack things together, they have Roots, they now have Cyclone as a baseline ability, they have movement speed in cat form, nearly all of their heals are instant cast or have extremely fast cast times, so they have phenomenal mobility, they have a battle res, they have innervates, they have soothe, they have the best dispel in the game. There's just so much utility that the Resto Druid has. And Blizzard has even added Stampeding Roar, a big AoE move speed buff for your whole team on a 2-minute cooldown, baseline to the Resto Druid. I get what they're trying to do with this. They're trying to make them more attractive for raiding, where their strengths don't come through half as much as they do in Mythic Plus. But I kind of wish that they'd found a way to make Resto Druids more attractive in raid without giving them utility that is also insane in Mythic Plus. Like, I don't know, I feel like they kind of just gave up and said, screw it, let's let them be the best. It's fine, whatever. So yes, if you want to play the best healer for Mythic Plus, I think Resto Druid's looking like a safe bet. Like I said, in raids, they're still a fun healer, they're still cool, but their utility isn't as strong there, so some of the other healing specs do tend to pull a little bit ahead of them. But nonetheless, this is a great healer, and by the way, I also think this is a phenomenal healer for PvP. My favorite Covenant ability for the Resto Druid is Convoke the Spirits, and this really fills the niche that Resto doesn't have of a big burst healing cooldown. So on a 2-minute cooldown, you can channel for 4 seconds to fire off a flurry of 12 Druid spells over those 4 seconds, and you can move while you're channeling this as well. This basically fires off a whole bunch of healing spells. It does tons of healing, but the really interesting thing about it is if you're in a dungeon and you don't even need that burst healing, well, you can use your affinities, right? You can go into cat form, and this will throw out a whole bunch of cat abilities for loads of damage. If you're balanced affinity, go into Moonkin form, and it's going to fire off a whole ton of Moonkin spells for, again, really big damage. Or Bear form, and it become really tanky, fire off a bunch of defensives. I think the flexibility of this is just really, really cool. And yeah, it feels right in Resto. though. It feels so strong, and is yet another reason that they are probably going to be the best for the whole expansion in Mythic Plus once again. And finally, in first place, we have the Discipline Priest. Disc Priest hasn't really changed much from BFA. I think Blizzard felt like they had a really good thing. This healer that heals through doing damage. Apply atonements to your allies with your healing spells, and then switch into doing damage, and have half of that damage translate into healing onto anyone who has that atonement buff on them. There are a couple of nice new spells for Discipline Priest though. Mind Blast is coming in, and this sort of fills the rotational spot that Power Word Solace had in BFA. What I've just been doing is using Mind Blast instead of Power Word Solace, and grabbing Mindbender in the talent tree instead, and I actually find that makes the rotation flow really well. Shadow Word Death is there for some big damage in Execute, although it is worth noting this does not trigger Atonement. And of course the big one, Power Infusion, there for all the pre-specs. This is super good for Discipline. You can use this to boost up your own healing and your own damage. It's very valuable on disc, or you can also give it to one of your damage dealers, right? And help them absolutely blast those damage meters. The thing that impresses me the most about disc though, is just the variety of healing playstyles that they have, right? In raids, you're all about these big windows of massive raid healing, this big burst healing, and then these periods of big downtime, right? So saving up your charges of Power Word Radiance, and then you coming into this big damage window, stacking as much atonement as you can, spreading loads of atonements, extending them all with evangelism, and then going into this big burst single target damage to just do crazy atonement healing. Compare that to the dungeons where, well, okay, a Power Word Radiance will just apply atonement to my whole group. So it's a much more consistent healing playstyle, and you're going to be spending a lot more time doing Shadow Mends, doing actual direct healing onto your tank, and then also, you know, having higher atonement uptime on your smaller group to do some group healing. Or then we swap into PvP, where having two spell schools, both holy and shadow spells, becomes a really big perk, where if you're kicked and locked out of one spell school, you still have the other one to fall back on, and your damage dealing potential becomes very crucial in securing kills with your team. Your instant cast spells and your ability to do things on the move becomes super strong, moving around and dropping fears, dropping mind controls. They're just three very different ways to play the game. You kind of almost get three specs in one in that sense. And it is their damage that really is the biggest strength of Disc Priest. I think it really is actually a balancing problem for Blizzard. They haven't quite figured out how to do this. They tend to balance all of the healers so that they can, roughly speaking, all do around about the same amount of healing. They do a fairly good job on that, but they're really bad at balancing the amount of damage that the healers can do. Disc Priest is by far on top, Holy Paladin is in second, and for both of those specs, the damage that they're able to do is definitely the biggest attraction to bringing them. It's just free DPS, right? Who's going to say no to free DPS in a group? It just lets you beat more bosses, it lets you clear dungeons faster. There's no downside to it. And when you stack that with the fact that Discipline Priest also brings lots of damage reduction cooldowns with Power Word Barrier, with Rapture, with Pain Suppression, this is what makes Discipline Priest the #1 healer for raid, in my opinion, or most likely to be the #1 healer for raid. They just have so many strengths that fit in so well, it's hard to say no to them. In terms of downsides, there really aren't that many to the Discipline Priest, to be honest with you. I think the biggest downside is certainly that they're a fairly difficult spec to play. This is not a spec that a beginner is going to walk into and find intuitive, find easy to use. It's definitely a spec that you need to think about. It's definitely a spec that for every single fight, you're going to need to plan ahead and think about how you're going to use your cooldowns, have to start ramping up, applying atonements, 10 seconds before damage even happens. And that's a big challenge. That's definitely, it's something that gets in the way to the entry level of the spec for sure. But if you enjoy that challenge, then I think you'll find a very fun healer with Discipline Priest that's going to be super strong in raids. It will still be very strong, I think, in Mythic Plus, very strong in PvP as well. Just going to be strong across the board everywhere. It brings the best damage out of all the healers and brings phenomenal group protection and group healing as well. Yeah, this is why I have Discipline ranked as #1. And of course, we can't go anywhere without talking about my favorite Covenant ability for Discipline. And my favorite Covenant ability so far is actually Mind Games, the Venthyr Covenant ability. This has a 45-second cooldown and a short, snappy 1.5-second cast. This does a big chunk of single target shadow damage to the target, and also leaves a debuff on them, quite a nasty one, where for the next 5 seconds, the next chunk of damage they do will actually heal their target instead, and the next chunk of healing they do will damage their target. This is obviously going to be an absolutely insane Covenant ability for PvP in every situation, But for Discipline Priest specifically, this works super well with their healing, because with Atonement Healing doesn't scale well off of AoE. It really works the best off of single target spells, so this big single target nuke with Mind Games translates with Atonement into a massive chunk of group or raid healing. It also syncs up really well with Schism, which is going to buff the damage you do to the target by 40%. So yeah, Mind Games, it fits so naturally into the Disc Priest, and it gives them this big burst healing cooldown on a very short cooldown. So yeah, I really like this one. So there you are, guys. That was my list of all of the healing specs in Shadowlands and how I think they're shaping up. They all have a lot of things going for them. Nearly every single spec has big strengths. Most specs have big weaknesses as well to balance it out. And as always, I'm curious what your opinions are on the specs, especially if you've played on the beta or the PTR and actually tested them out. How are you finding the different specs and how would you rank them? But there you are. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a ton of fun making this one. And of course, we will be back very soon over the next couple of weeks to do the rankings for all the other different roles, melee DPS, range DPS, and of course the tanks as well. So until then, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the other videos here on the channel too, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.